The starship Harmony drifted silently through the void, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with gentle blue light. Ambassador Kaiven stood at the observation deck, his forearms folded behind his back as he gazed at the yellow star growing larger in their view screen. After 3 centuries of peaceful first contact missions, he expected this to be another routine diplomatic venture. The Altaran species had evolved on a world of floating crystal cities and singing forests. Violence was so foreign to their nature that their language had no word for war. Kaiven's people had discovered 47 civilizations across the galaxy, each one joining the Galactic Council through gentle persuasion and mutual understanding. Science. Officer Lon Tai's tentacles danced across her console, her excitement visible through the color changes in her translucent skin. The radio signals from the third planet were fascinating, filled with music, stories, and what appeared to be scientific discussions. The mathematical sequences suggested intelligence comparable to Council standards. Ambassador, I'm detecting artificial constructs orbiting the planet, Lon Tai reported, her voice melodic like wind chimes. Space stations, communication satellites, and what appears to be a primitive but functional space transportation network. Kaiven nodded approvingly. Tool use and orbital construction were excellent signs. The species below had clearly mastered basic engineering principles. He made a mental note to recommend them for immediate cultural exchange programs. That optimism shattered within the hour. The first explosion lit up the planet's night side like a newborn star. The Harmony's sensors, designed to detect the gentlest energy fluctuations across space, screamed warnings as massive amounts of destructive force erupted from the planet's surface. Mountains disappeared in controlled avalanches. Deserts turned to glass under intense heat. By the ancient crystals, whispered Navigation Officer Zen Kora, his usually calm demeanor cracking. What are they doing to their own world? More detonations followed. The humans, as the intercepted communications called them, were systematically testing weapons that defied rational explanation. Projectiles launched from their surface traveled at velocities that made Council starships look sluggish. Energy beams carved through solid rock like it was morning mist. Lon Tai's tentacles trembled as she recorded the data, her skin shifting to worried purple hues. Ambassador, these weapons could destroy entire continents. A single one of their larger devices could eliminate our capital city and everything within 1,000 kilometers. The crew watched in stunned horror as the humans launched metal cylinders from their surface that split apart in space, releasing hundreds of smaller projectiles. Each one moved with enough kinetic energy to punch through the hull of a Council vessel. The precision was terrifying, the destructive potential beyond anything in their databases. Far below on Earth, Colonel Minho sat in an underground bunker built to survive direct nuclear strikes. The walls were lined with screens showing missile trajectories, blast calculations, and weather patterns that would affect fallout dispersion. To him, this was just another Tuesday test of their intercontinental ballistic missile systems. His wife Yunji worked at the adjacent console, analyzing data from their early warning satellites. Her specialty was threat assessment, a job that required her to think like an enemy, planning to destroy everything she held dear. The alien probe they detected 3 days ago hung in space just outside their sensor range, but its energy signature was unlike anything in their databases. The probe is still there, she murmured, adjusting her glasses as she studied the readings. Same position, same energy output. It's watching us, learning our capabilities. Minho glanced at the tactical display showing their latest missile test. The warhead had successfully penetrated 3 layers of simulated enemy defenses before detonating with enough force to level a small city. Standard procedure for testing their nuclear deterrent. If they're studying our military exercises, he said grimly, they're probably wondering why we have enough firepower to destroy our own planet several times over. Yunji pulled up historical data on her screen, showing decades of weapons development driven by humanity's violent past. Wars that had claimed millions of lives, natural disasters that had wiped out entire civilizations, predators that had hunted their ancestors for millennia. Every weapon system they'd developed had been a response to some existential threat. They probably think we're monsters, she said quietly, watching another missile streak across the night sky above them. Back on the Harmony, the crew struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. In their experience, advanced civilizations moved beyond violence as they developed space travel. The humans appeared to have done the opposite, weaponizing their technological advancement to unprecedented levels. Commander Telras, a veteran of 30 first contact missions, studied the tactical analysis with growing alarm. These humans have developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans on a massive scale. Their entire technological tree seems focused on destruction. The final straw came when their sensors detected the humans' orbital weapons platforms, satellites armed with kinetic bombardment systems that could drop tungsten rods from space with the force of nuclear weapons. No radiation, no fallout, just pure destructive kinetic energy delivered with surgical precision anywhere on their planets. Surface Kaiven made the decision that would change everything. The emergency beacon activated, sending faster-than-light communications to the Galactic Council's emergency assembly. Within hours, representatives from 47 peaceful civilizations gathered in the crystal chambers of the Council homeworld. The debate lasted 3 standard days. Holographic displays showed humanity's weapons tests, their military installations, their capacity for global destruction. Species that had never known violence struggled to understand beings who had turned warfare into an art form. The vote was unanimous. Humanity represented a clear and present danger to galactic peace. Immediate containment protocols would be implemented before these violent creatures could spread their destructive nature to the stars. None of them realized they were about to make the biggest mistake in galactic history. The alien shuttle descended. Through Sol's morning sky like a falling star wrapped in silver light, its hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, defying every principle of aerodynamics that human engineers understood. No visible engines, no exhaust trails, just smooth, impossible flight that made the gathered crowd gasp in wonder. Ambassador Kaiven emerged from the craft with graceful movements that reminded observers of a dancer. His elongated form stood nearly 3 meters tall, with skin that shimmered between blue and gold depending on the light. 3 large eyes dominated his face, each one capable of independent movement as they scanned the welcoming committee with obvious curiosity. President J1 stepped forward in his finest ceremonial robes, flanked by an honor guard in dress uniforms. The moment felt historic, the first official contact between Earth and the stars. Defense Minister Subin stood beside him, her expression carefully neutral despite the weapons scanners hidden throughout the landing area. The traditional Korean welcome ceremony began with ancient music and offerings of rice wine. Kaiven accepted everything with polite confusion, his translator device working overtime to process cultural concepts that had no equivalent in galactic standard. The alien delegation consisted of 6 beings from different species, each one more bizarre than the last. Science Officer Lon Tai resembled a walking jellyfish with dozens of tentacles that constantly shifted color. Cultural Advisor Morven looked like a tree that had learned to walk, with bark-like skin and leaves that rustled with each breath. Their peaceful nature was obvious in every gesture, every careful movement designed to avoid causing offense. The ceremony moved to the Blue House, where translators worked frantically to establish proper communication protocols. President Jae-won offered the traditional Korean greeting of respect, bowing deeply before gesturing to the prepared meeting room. The aliens moved with liquid grace, their technology seamlessly interfacing with human systems. The trouble started when Kaiven activated his holographic display. Images of Earth's military installations filled the air above the conference table. Nuclear missile silos, aircraft carriers bristling with weapons, orbital defense platforms that could rain death from space. The aliens' 3 eyes focused on President Jae-won with unmistakable concern. "Your species has developed remarkable technology," Kaiven began, his voice carrying harmonious undertones that suggested singing. "But your weapon systems are troubling. No rational civilization requires such excessive destructive capability." Defense Minister Subin leaned forward, her years of military experience evident in her posture. "Ambassador, those weapons exist, Because our world has forced us to develop them. We've faced threats you can't imagine. The holographic display shifted to show council worlds, peaceful planets where crystalline cities floated in harmony with nature. Beings that had never known war, never faced extinction, never needed to fight for survival. Their worlds were gardens of tranquility that made Earth look like a battlefield. We offer you a place in the Galactic Council, Kaiven continued. Advanced technology, faster than light travel, medical advances that could eliminate disease. In exchange, we require complete disarmament of your military forces. The room fell silent. President Jaewon exchanged glances with his advisors, reading the shock and disbelief in their faces. General Dong-hyun, a veteran of 3 major conflicts, stood slowly from his chair. Ambassador, I think you don't understand what Earth is like, he said carefully. Our world has apex predators that hunt in packs. We have natural disasters that can wipe out entire civilizations in hours. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes that make your peaceful worlds look like vacation resorts. Kaiven's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among his species. But surely advanced beings can overcome such primitive challenges through technology and cooperation. Dr. Hee-won, Earth's leading expert on alien life forms, activated her own display showing human evolutionary history. Images of humanity's ancestors fleeing from massive predators, surviving ice ages that lasted millennia, building civilizations, only to watch them fall to natural disasters. We evolved on a death world, Ambassador, she explained patiently. For millions of years, everything on this planet tried to kill us. Predators, diseases, climate changes, asteroid impacts. We survived by being paranoid, by preparing for the worst possible scenarios. The alien delegation exchanged musical communications in their own language, their tone suggesting disbelief. Cultural advisor Morven's leaves rustled with what might have been laughter. You speak of excessive caution as if it were wisdom, Kaiven observed. This paranoia you describe sounds like a mental illness that should be treated, not celebrated. General Dong-hyun's face hardened. Paranoia? Ambassador, 3 years ago a meteor the size of a city bus exploded over our atmosphere. If it had been slightly larger, it could have wiped out millions of people. Last month we detected 17 near-Earth asteroids that could end civilization if they hit us. We track over 30,000 pieces of space debris that could destroy our satellites. The aliens looked confused, their peaceful worldview unable to process the constant threat that shaped human thinking. On their worlds, such dangers had been eliminated eons ago through technology and careful planetary management. Your excessive military preparations suggest an obsession with violence, Science Officer Lon Tai added, her tentacles shifting to worried purple. Healthy civilizations move beyond such primitive instincts. President Jaewon felt the conversation slipping away from diplomacy toward something darker. He tried a different approach, showing images of human rescue operations, disaster relief efforts, peaceful uses of their advanced technology. But the aliens saw only the weapons, only the preparations for war. The meeting ended with polite but firm trade restrictions. Humanity would be observed, studied, and contained until they could prove they had evolved beyond their violent nature. The aliens departed with promises to return when humans had learned to embrace peace. In the Deep Space Monitoring Station orbiting Earth's moon, Communications Officer So Young stared at readings that made her blood run cold. Massive gravitational distortions were approaching from the space between galaxies, moving faster than anything in their databases. The energy signatures suggested technology far beyond human or alien understanding. She transmitted the data to the alien delegation, hoping their advanced sensors could explain what was coming. The response came back within hours, dismissed as typical human fear-mongering and paranoid threat assessment. The aliens had made their first critical mistake. They assumed that because their worlds were safe, the universe itself was peaceful. They had forgotten that some threats were so terrible that even paranoid humans couldn't imagine them. Something ancient and hungry was coming to the galaxy, and the only species prepared for war was about to be disarmed by those who needed their protection most. The first sign of doom came from the Kepler Observatory on the outer rim of Council space. Astronomer Velnara, a peaceful being whose species had spent centuries studying the beauty of distant stars, watched her instruments detect something impossible. The gravitational readings showed massive objects moving through the void between galaxies, but they weren't following any natural orbital patterns. They were accelerating directly toward the Milky Way. The emergency beacon reached the Council homeworld within hours. Ambassador Kai Ven stood in the Crystal Command Center, surrounded by representatives from 47 peaceful civilizations. The holographic display showed long-range sensor data that made no sense to beings who had never known true warfare. "The objects are enormous," reported Science Officer Lon Tai, her tentacles trembling as she processed the incoming data. "Each one is roughly the size of your Earth's moon, but they're not natural celestial bodies. They're constructed with complex internal structures and energy signatures unlike anything in our databases." The first Devourer ship materialized at the edge of the Altaran system without any warning. One moment, the space around Kai Ven's homeworld was empty. The next, it was filled with a nightmare that defied description. The creature looked like someone had taken a massive jellyfish and merged it with the most advanced technology imaginable. Its translucent body pulsed with biomechanical organs the size of cities. Metallic veins ran through its flesh, carrying energy that made stars look dim. Thousands of smaller organisms swarmed around it like antibodies, each one capable of destroying a Council starship. The thing didn't communicate, didn't negotiate, didn't even acknowledge the desperate diplomatic signals being broadcast toward it. It simply began to feed, the Altaran defense grid activated with elegant precision. Beautiful energy weapons that had been designed for ceremonial purposes fired harmless light beams at the invader. The attacks struck the creature's hull and were absorbed without any visible effect. The biomechanical horror didn't even slow down as it extended massive feeding tentacles toward the planet below. Within minutes, entire cities began to disappear. Not destroyed, not damaged, but consumed completely, as if they had never existed. The creature was literally eating the planet, converting matter into energy to fuel its impossible biology. Buildings, vehicles, and living beings were all absorbed with the same mechanical efficiency. "By the ancient crystals," Kai Ven whispered, watching his beautiful homeworld being devoured bite by bite. "What are these things?" The answer came from the creature itself. As it fed, it transmitted information directly into the minds of every living being within light years. Images of entire galaxies being consumed, civilizations that had lasted millions of years reduced to empty space. The Devourers were older than the Council, older than most stars, and they had been sleeping in the void between galaxies for eons. Now they were awake and hungry. More Devourer ships materialized throughout Council space. Each one was unique, adapted for different types of consumption. Some specialized in devouring planets, others consumed entire star systems by feeding on solar energy. The largest ones were mobile factories that converted consumed matter into new devourer organisms. The Council's response was textbook diplomacy. Emergency sessions were called, committees were formed, and lengthy debates were held about the proper protocol for dealing with unknown alien species. While they talked, entire star systems were being erased from existence. Commander Telras led the Council's military response, such as it was. His fleet of 300 vessels represented the combined defensive forces of 47 peaceful civilizations. Their weapons were designed to disable rather than destroy. Their tactics focused on minimizing casualties rather than achieving victory. The battle for the Centauri system lasted exactly 4 minutes. The Council fleet opened fire with their most advanced energy weapons, carefully calibrated to cause minimal environmental damage. The beams struck the Devourer ship and were absorbed like raindrops hitting an ocean. In response, the creature released a cloud of smaller organisms that swarmed the Council vessels like angry wasps. Each organism was roughly the size of a fighter jet, but moved with the coordination of a hive mind. They didn't use traditional weapons. Instead, they simply attached themselves to Council ships and began the same consumption process. Hulls dissolved like sugar in water. Crews were absorbed before they could even scream. Within minutes, the Council's greatest military fleet was reduced to floating debris and the raw materials needed to create more Devourers. The biomechanical Horrors grew stronger with each victory, adapting and evolving with terrifying speed. Back on Earth, Admiral Boram stood in the war room deep beneath NORAD, watching satellite feeds that showed the galaxy burning. The same aliens who had demanded human disarmament were now sending desperate pleas for help. Their elegant diplomatic protocols had proven worthless against an enemy that didn't understand anything except hunger. "Ma'am," communications officer So Young reported from her console, "we're receiving multiple distress signals from Council space. Ambassador Kaiven is requesting immediate military assistance." Captain Jin Woo reviewed the tactical data with grim satisfaction. For months, the aliens had criticized human military preparations as excessive and paranoid. Now those same preparations represented the galaxy's only hope for survival. "Get me Colonel Eugene," Admiral Boram ordered. "Tell him to prep the heavy ordnance, everything we've got." In the weapons depot beneath Cheyenne Mountain, Colonel Eugene supervised the loading of humanity's most destructive arsenals. Nuclear warheads that could vaporize cities, antimatter charges that released energy equivalent to small stars, kinetic kill vehicles that could punch holes through planets. "They called it overkill," he muttered, watching technicians load a 50-megaton warhead onto a missile platform. "Let's see what they call it when it saves their lives." The human fleet that launched from Earth carried enough firepower to sterilize several solar systems. Admiral Boram's flagship alone mounted weapons that made the Council's entire military look like toys. Behind the combat vessels, support ships carried the scientists and engineers who would need to study Devourer technology if humanity had any hope of survival. Dr. Sumin worked frantically in her mobile laboratory, analyzing the limited data available about the biomechanical invaders. Her expertise in xenobiology was humanity's best hope for understanding an enemy that seemed to violate every known law of physics and biology. As the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward a galaxy under siege, one thing was certain: the peaceful civilizations that had condemned humanity's violent nature were about to discover why predator species developed such excessive defensive capabilities. Sometimes the universe required monsters to fight monsters. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace into chaos. Sector 7 looked like a graveyard of civilizations, with the burning remains of council ships drifting between planets that were half consumed by the biomechanical horrors. 3 massive devourer organisms floated in the system's center, each one the size of Earth's moon, their translucent bodies pulsing with stolen energy from destroyed worlds. Admiral Boram stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching. Her tactical display light up with targeting solutions. Her fleet of 200 ships represented humanity's greatest military achievement, but against creatures that had devoured entire galaxies, even that might not be enough. "All ships, this is Admiral Boram," she broadcast across the fleet. "Remember your training. These things don't negotiate, don't surrender, and don't feel pain. Hit them with everything we've got and keep hitting until they stop moving." The Mai. First salvo came from humanity's long-range missile platforms. Hundreds of nuclear-tipped projectiles streaked across space, each one guided by artificial intelligence that could calculate trajectories through the gravitational chaos of a dying star system. The Council survivors watched in amazement as the missiles actually reached their targets, something their own weapons had failed to do. The explosions lit up space like newborn stars. Nuclear fire washed over the nearest devourer, and for the first time since the invasion began, one of the creatures actually reacted. Its biomechanical hull buckled under the assault, metallic veins rupturing and spilling bioluminescent fluid into the void. "Confirmed hit on target Alpha," reported Weapons Officer Jun Sik, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "Hull breach detected, but the creature is already beginning self-repair." That was when Captain Tae Young deployed humanity's secret weapon. The UES Retribution had been retrofitted with experimental technology that the Council had deemed too dangerous for civilized warfare. Nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers that could slice through planetary armor, powered by controlled fusion reactions that released more energy than most stars. The beam lanced out like a sword of pure destruction, cutting deep into the Devourer's regenerating tissue. Where it struck, The creature's biomechanical components simply ceased to exist, converted to plasma by energies that approached the theoretical limits of matter itself. Ambassador Kaiven watched from the human flagship's observation deck, his three eyes wide with shock and horror. His peaceful species had never imagined that such devastating weapons could exist, let alone be used with such casual precision. "Your weapons," he gasped, his translator struggling to process the concept. "They're so completely destructive." Captain Tae-young glanced up from his targeting display, where he was coordinating attacks against targets that moved faster than anything in Council databases. "Ambassador, you evolved on worlds where the biggest threat was deciding which flower to pollinate. We evolved on a planet where tigers hunted our ancestors and typhoons destroyed our cities. When something wants to kill you, the only rational response is to kill it harder." The second wave of the human attack involved kinetic kill vehicles, massive tungsten rods accelerated to significant fractions of light speed by electromagnetic railguns. Each projectile carried no explosives, no complex technology, just pure kinetic energy equivalent to several nuclear weapons. They punched through devourer armor like bullets through paper, creating holes that the creatures couldn't immediately repair. Engineer Hanul coordinated the attack from the fleet's command ship, her fingers dancing across controls that managed more destructive power than most civilizations possessed in their entire histories. She watched as fusion warheads detonated in carefully calculated patterns, creating electromagnetic pulses that disrupted the biomechanical coordination systems keeping the devourers functional. "EMP burst successful," she reported to Admiral Boram. "The creatures are showing signs of neural disruption. Their regeneration rates are dropping by 30%. What the Council had called excessive preparation now revealed itself as humanity's greatest advantage. Every human ship carried redundant weapons systems, backup power supplies, and emergency protocols designed to function even when everything else failed. While Council vessels required perfect conditions to operate, human ships were built to fight in the aftermath of nuclear war. The tide of battle shifted when the smallest devourer attempted to retreat toward the system's outer edge. Captain Jinwoo's destroyer squadron intercepted it with a barrage of antimatter charges, each one releasing energy that briefly outshone the local star. The creature's biomechanical body couldn't adapt fast enough to the cascade of exotic particles, and it began to collapse in on itself. On the surface of Kepler 442b, Colonel Minho's ground forces faced a different challenge. Thousands of smaller, devourer organisms had landed on the planet, consuming everything in their path, while the main battle raged in space above. The Council evacuation ships couldn't penetrate the swarm, leaving millions of civilians trapped on the dying world. Minho deployed weapons that had been banned by every galactic treaty the Council had ever written. Fusion-powered artillery that could level city blocks, chemical weapons designed to disrupt biological processes, and kinetic bombardment platforms that dropped tungsten rods from orbit with pinpoint accuracy. Colonel, his communications officer, reported, "Council Command is protesting our use of banned weapons on their colony world." Minho watched another devourer organism dissolve under a barrage of chemical agents specifically designed to target biomechanical tissue. "Tell them they can file a complaint after we save their people." The human infantry fought with equipment that shocked the Council observers. Personal energy shields that could deflect attacks from creatures the size of buildings, powered armor that let individual soldiers carry weapons equivalent to small artillery pieces, and tactical nuclear devices that could be deployed by single squads. Sergeant Kyung-ho led his unit through the ruins of what had been a beautiful crystal city, hunting the smaller devourers that were consuming the architectural remains. His squad's weapons fired depleted uranium rounds that could penetrate any known armor, backed up by plasma grenades that burned hotter than the surface of most stars. The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships took damage that would have destroyed Council vessels, but kept fighting through systems failures and hull breaches that would have sent peaceful species into full retreat. When the UES Dauntless lost its main engines, Captain Eugene used the ship's remaining momentum to ram directly into a devourer's feeding apparatus, detonating his remaining nuclear arsenal in a suicide attack that saved 3 colony worlds. By the time the last devourer organism was destroyed, Sector 7 looked like the aftermath of a cosmic war. Space debris from both human and alien ships drifted between planets scarred by weapons that could reshape continents. But for the first time since the invasion began, the biomechanical horrors had been stopped. Dr. Sumin worked frantically in her mobile laboratory, analyzing samples of devourer tissue recovered from the battlefield. Her research would prove crucial for understanding how to fight creatures that seemed to violate every known law of biology and physics. The galaxy's peaceful civilizations had learned a harsh lesson. Sometimes survival required beings willing to be called monsters, and humanity had been preparing for this fight since the first human picked up a stone to defend against a predator. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the galaxy had hope. The devourer retreat came as suddenly as their arrival. The massive biomechanical creatures simply vanished into the darkness between galaxies, leaving behind a wounded but victorious Milky Way. Entire star systems bore the scars of the war, with planets half consumed and space filled with the debris of both human and alien vessels. 6 months after the final battle, the new Galactic Defense Station orbited Earth like a technological miracle. The massive structure combined human engineering with Council technology, creating something neither species could have built alone. Its weapons arrays could sterilize solar systems, while its sensors could detect threats from neighboring galaxies. Ambassador Kai Ven stood on the observation deck, his 3 eyes taking in the view of Earth below. The blue marble looked so peaceful from space, but he now understood the violent forces that had shaped the species living on its surface. Beside him, President J1 reviewed reports from the reconstruction efforts across Council space. 17 worlds partially consumed, 43 billion lives lost, and over 200 star systems requiring complete rebuilding, President J1 read from his tablet. The damage could have been so much worse. Admiral Boram joined them, still wearing the battle-scarred uniform she'd refused to change since the war ended. Her hair had gone completely grey during the fighting, and new lines marked her face, but her eyes held the satisfaction of someone who had saved civilization itself. "We called your preparations paranoid," Kai Ven admitted, his musical voice carrying notes of deep regret. "We called your weapons excessive, your military doctrine primitive. We were fools who mistook wisdom for madness." The alien skin shifted through colors that indicated shame and respect in equal measure. Around them, the station buzzed with activity as human and Council engineers worked side by side on projects that would have been impossible just months earlier. "My grandmother survived the Korean War," Admiral Boram said quietly, looking out at the stars where some of her best ships still drifted as monuments to the fallen. She watched Chinese and North Korean forces push south, fighting with weapons that could level entire cities. "My grandfather lived through earthquakes that killed hundreds of thousands, typhoons that wiped coastal cities off the map." She turned to face the alien ambassador, her expression serious, but not unkind. "We don't prepare for war because we love violence, Ambassador. We prepare because the universe doesn't care about our good intentions. Nature doesn't negotiate. Predators don't accept diplomatic solutions. And apparently, neither do galaxy-eating monsters from dark space." Through the observation windows, they could see the construction of humanity's greatest achievement. The orbital shipyards around Earth now produced vessels that combined human destructive capability with Council defensive technology. Ships that could survive anything the universe threw at them, while carrying enough firepower to make even the Devourers think twice. Captain Tae-young's new command, the UES Guardian, drifted past the station on its shakedown cruise. The massive vessel bristled with weapons that made the old human fleet look like toys. Nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers powered by miniature stars, kinetic kill platforms that could accelerate projectiles to near-light speed, and antimatter charges, stored in magnetic bottles that defied every safety protocol the Council had ever written. The Council vote was unanimous, President J1 announced, reading from the official communication that had arrived that morning. "Earth is now the official military headquarters for the entire galaxy. All Council species will undergo mandatory defense training using human protocols." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The same species that had been considered too violent for civilized society was now being asked to teach warfare to beings who had spent millennia perfecting the art of peace. In the station's training facilities, Colonel Minho ran Council soldiers through exercises that would have been unthinkable before the war. Alteran troops learned to operate weapons that could level mountains. Zentorian engineers studied the principles behind fusion warheads. Even the peaceful tree-like arboreals were learning basic combat tactics. The key to survival, Minho explained, to a group of alien recruits is accepting that the universe is trying to kill you. Once you understand that, everything else becomes preparation. Dr. Haiwan smiled as she watched the training from the observation booth. Her xenobiology research had been crucial in developing weapons effective against biomechanical entities. Now she worked with Council scientists to prepare for threats they couldn't yet imagine. What one species calls overkill, she murmured to herself, another calls Tuesday. The research laboratories buzzed with activity as human and alien scientists worked together on projects that pushed the boundaries of known science. Dr. Su Min led a team developing new sensors that could detect devourer signatures across galactic distances. Engineer Hanul designed weapon systems that made their wartime arsenal look primitive. In the deep space monitoring stations, Communications Officer So Young coordinated a sensor network that stretched across the entire galaxy. Early warning systems that could detect threats months before they arrived, giving the combined fleets time to deploy and coordinate responses. The political transformation was equally dramatic. The Galactic Council had reorganized itself around the principle of mutual defense rather than peaceful coexistence. Species that had never even considered the possibility of violence now maintained standing armies equipped with weapons that could crack planets. Ambassador Kai Ven had become humanity's greatest advocate in Council politics, using his influence to push through military budgets that would have been unthinkable before the war. His own people, the peaceful Alterans, now operated some of the most heavily armed vessels in Council space. "We were like children playing in a garden," he often said in his speeches. "We thought the universe was safe because our small corner of it was peaceful." The humans knew better. They understood that safety is something you build with preparation, not something you receive as a gift. The transformation wasn't just military. Human culture began spreading throughout Council space, as beings who had never known conflict learned to appreciate the mindset that came from surviving on a death world. Human music, literature, and philosophy found eager audiences among species that were discovering their own capacity for strength. But perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy viewed threats. The old Council policy of peaceful contact and diplomatic solutions remained for truly peaceful species. But now there were protocols for dealing with entities that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be negotiated with, and only understood force. Deep in the void between galaxies, the Devourers waited. Their biomechanical forms drifted through dark space, healing from wounds that should have been impossible to inflict. They had consumed thousands of galaxies across cosmic time, but never had they encountered resistance like what they'd faced. In the Milky Way, they would return, stronger and more prepared. But when they did, they would find a galaxy that had learned the harsh lessons of survival, a galaxy that understood the difference between peace and defenselessness. The humans had taught them well. Sometimes the universe required monsters to fight monsters. Sometimes survival meant being willing to be called the villain by those you were protecting. The galaxy was safer because someone had been willing to carry that burden. And in the deepest vaults of the Galactic Defense Station, humanity's most terrible weapons waited in silence, tools of destruction so powerful that even their creators hoped they would never be needed again. But they were ready, just in case. The end.